2 months back and forth messaging. She finally got a hold of me. And I gave her my email address, and she sent me 3 pictures of what the doll looked like that she was talking about. I was very much so intrigued about this doll. So I asked her about it, and she says she bought the doll in an estate sale about 4 or 5 years ago from a woman that just recently passed, and all her stuff went up in an estate sale, including an old piano, some old furniture, stuffed clothes, and a bunch of other dolls. Yes. The woman she would take these old dolls and she would remake them and make them all gothic looking. Very much so like this one that you see. Now, the woman, I asked her what exactly was going on with it. She says it's an old porcelain doll that was redone, remodified, and repainted and repaired. Apparently the doll itself has a number of cracks in her back and on her arms and legs. She had little cracks in it that the previous woman repaired and apparently redid the skin, repainted it, and gave it a gothic look. Glued some hair, different color hair on her head, and found this old dress. And the dress itself was later modified by the woman to make it look kind of weird and gothic, and put this this necklace on around her neck. So I said, wow, it's really cool. And I asked her if I can buy the doll. She says, no, the doll's not really for sale yet, because her and her husband flip stuff. They go to estate sales and they buy things. So I asked her if she was ever going to sell the doll, she's going to let me know about it. She'll say, well, I usually put stuff on an auction site or on eBay. So I managed to keep in contact with this woman and her husband. And the husband actually called me a couple times to talk to me about some other old stuff, including my old 1973 Mercury. And he was actually kind of interested in wanting to buy it himself. So the woman tells me that the doll itself is very, very ancient, very, very old. She says a number of collectors claim the doll to be 50 or 60 years old. It's an old porcelain doll. The legs move, they bend, the elbows bump, the shoulders move. But she had no idea what the origin of the doll was. It had stampings on the lower back, but apparently it was filled in by the previous owner who owned the doll. I guess to fix in the cracks or whatever. So we did some looking, was wondering if it's a Steiner doll, if it's a Lopelier doll, or whatever. Apparently it was not really, it doesn't even look like a doll that was made in the United States. So the story goes that she bought this doll in a yard sale for about $20, $25 with a bunch of other stuff. And she was going to keep it with the other dolls, and she started flipping them. So she pretty much resisted my offers to buy her until roughly about 3 weeks ago. She gives me an email and says, you know what, you and I have been talking a lot. My husband's called you, and we're talking about old stuff and cars and old stuff. She said, I'm going to give you an opportunity to buy this doll from me. So I offered her a pretty damn good price for her, and she ends up, she finally relented and sold me the doll, and I bought the case as well. Now, she tells me this is a haunted doll, alleged haunted doll, allegedly. The story that she got from the previous owner's daughter said the doll itself was haunted. She bought this doll in the early 70s. She had this doll for a number of years, about 20, 25 years. And the story with it was the doll, she bought the doll from the previous owners who had the doll, and they themselves owned it from the 60s. And the mother bought the doll at a yard sale right around 1960 or 61. So the origins even go further back. So we later found out from the woman I bought this from. I got a hold of the actual son of the owner that had the doll in the 60s. I got him through email. He was an old hot rodder from the Greatest Generation. He was an old guy. I'm 56. He was in his late 70s. Got a hold of him, and he sent me an email about the doll itself. Actually, a message on my messenger. So I actually got the phone. I actually called him, and he lives in Maine. And I asked him about this doll and a bunch of other stuff. He would sell old cars and everything like that. And his sister had this doll that was given to her by her grandmother back in the 40s. The story goes that this doll showed up in Maine right around 1946, 1947. And the origins of the doll itself, they were a German family that came from Germany, which they spent during the Second World War getting bombed on by Americans and the British. And they lived in a place, where in the hell was it? I'm trying to remember it was. It was somewhere in Stuttgart, I believe. And the story goes that this doll was actually even older than that. He believes that the doll actually came from the great-great-grandmother and possibly the great-great-grandmother. I think it was like 2 greats or 3 greats. And he says the doll was made in Bavaria. And he says right around 1913. The information I got about Helena here, that I talked to a collector, and Ashley, her name was Ashley Norbit, said that this particular doll was probably made in 1913 in Bavaria to a small little doll shop that specialized in making local dolls. And since this is a 24-inch doll, he informs me that they were very rare at the time. Most of your rare dolls at that time period were mostly small, 12 inches to about 18 inches. Helena here happens to be 24 inches. So it's very rare, and more than likely this doll came from a rich kid. So the doll originally had probably blonde hair or brown hair. And the scalp itself, it's what they call a rooted doll or a non-rooted doll. This doll does not have roots. Most of your rooted dolls, he told me, came right around sometime in the 1920s when they started actually gluing the hair inside these little holes on the top of the head of the dolls. He says that this one is a non-rooted doll, which makes her pretty goddamn old, about 100 years old. And I happened to look under the scalp to see if there's any holes, and there was no holes there. The hair was actually glued to the head. And I asked, is it possible that he might have glazed it over with porcelain? He says, another way you can tell is by the hairline itself. It'll have like a small hairline pattern. She does not have it. So he says the doll is roughly about 106 years old, which makes her very old. The doll itself was handed down by family until it was sold off at a yard sale sometime in the 60s. And the previous woman who got it basically collected old dolls, scalped them, and made them all gothic out during sometime in the late 80s to the early 90s to probably the 2000s. I believe personally that this doll might have been modified sometime, I would say, probably during the kind of the early Gothic era, maybe in the 89, 90, 91, 92 maybe. I'm just throwing it out there as a ballpark thing. So the guy told me it was pretty it's a pretty damn old doll. The doll has been repaired a number of times because I saw a number of very light cracks in her skin and on her legs and arms. Now, as the origin of the weirdo haunted doll, it has been said that this doll is haunted and sometimes you hear weird tappings at nighttime in the walls or whatever, or on the ceiling, that you have no idea where it came from. Some stories also that the doll has moved, appeared in other rooms, and I heard once that she actually was out of her box, out of the lady actually had a case, and said that the doll itself was found out of the case. Now, I don't know if you're going to believe in supernatural stuff or crazy superstitions or whatever, but ever since I've owned her for the past 3 weeks, we've definitely heard some strange knocking here about 2 to 3 in the morning, and managed to record it on cassette one night when we were all asleep here, and I pressed record on a slow playing tape player, and funny, we heard some weird tapping on the actual cassette. So as her being a scary doll thing, I don't know. As her being haunted, it's possible. But other information I know about this doll is there's really not much more I can tell. Oh, he did say something about childhood or child dolls. This doll, I told him that this doll actually has a bust line, and she actually have slender waist, and her hips are slightly rounded. He tells me that it's very, it is rare, especially over 100 years ago, to have what is called an adult or a teenage or adult dolls. Almost 99% of these dolls were all little kid dolls, flat-chested and whatever, and have childlike faces. Helena here, is which doll was named sometime in the mid-50s or late 50s, early 60s, actually has a bust line. And actually, when I looked a little closer to her, when I picked her up and felt around her waistline, she actually has a sort of an older female waistline, and her hips were rounded. So he says those are a rare dolls for that time period, because they didn't make really too many adult or teenage dolls. He said something about etiquette. It might be an etiquette thing or whatever, so I have no idea. To finish off this video, I asked him what is possibly her origins or who's she from. He says some sort of weird French name or something like that, but he says more than likely not. It's probably a privately made doll from a small little doll shop or company sometime in Bavaria in 1913. So basically, Helena here lived through 2 world wars in Bavaria and Germany, where they last found her. And it's believed that she came over here in 1946 or 1947 with the German bride marrying a American serviceman. And amongst her property was this doll, probably with blonde hair or brown hair, probably with a different dress or outfit. She probably wasn't all goth out, and you could probably see her eyes. She might have had blue eyes.